Okay, good morning. All right, let's get going on the technical overview. It's what everybody's here for anyway, right? It's the most exciting part of all of this. Oh, that's just me. Okay, all right. So let's talk about SRFA1, right? So two different research areas, SRFA1, SRFA2. SRFA1 is all about vertical solutions, right? So we're looking for a prototype at the end of this. This is a prototype that needs to fulfill a vertical use case. Okay, so it has to provide value to a vertical, right? Which is why you need to have a vertical partner as part of your partnership group that's associated with this. And this needs to be demonstrated in some type of a field environment, right? So let's just take an example, right? Like if you are a manufacturing facility, the expectation would be that this prototype would be demonstrated in an actual manufacturing facility, right? Or a sim facility would be okay as well. One of the reasons that we typically do, obviously, field work is because it's impossible to simulate digitally, right? What will actually be encountered in the field, especially in outdoor applications where infrastructure may be subject to things like wind and elements and temperature and humidity and things such as that. So we are looking to see these prototypes demonstrated in a field environment. The sub-bullet that you see here under the second bullet, which is prototype demonstration must employ endpoints, right? So this would be, let's say, as a nod to our friends at Iowa State that are here on the precision agriculture side of things, right? They have lots of sensors that they've developed, right? They can go on plants to measure certain things associated with plant health, right? Which I don't pretend to be an expert on. Things like nitrogen, water, other stuff that's important. So those types of sensors, right, would be an example of the endpoints that would be something that you would need to deploy as part of the prototype and in the field environment. Okay, again, remember there's really three components that you need to fill, and it doesn't have to be necessarily three discrete entities that fill them, but you have to have a solution provider, someone who's going to actually be writing the code, developing the solution to solve this vertical use case challenge, whatever the case may be. You got to have a vertical player, right? So you got to have somebody who you can actually validate this with, and then you got to have a network, right? So you got to have some mechanism to relay information over a wireless interface, right? And that can be through commercial, right? So AT&T, Verizon, any of the regional providers, any type of commercial cell service would work for something like this. You could also be a private network owner, right? There's nothing that would preclude you from checking this box if you owned your own private network, whether that be with licensed spectrum or even unlicensed spectrum. You could do either one of those. Okay, so at a minimum, you have to have some functional requirements to get this thing started, right? And that should be no secret to anybody in this room, right? You should have ultimately, you should have a mission that should drive strategic parameters, right? Things are of strategic importance. So strategically important items will then give rise to functional requirements to technical requirements, and off you go to developing software, right? So there shouldn't be anything new here in terms of that. It's in terms of starting with the defined functional requirements, and then you have to exit this thing, of course, with a prototype, right? We do expect you to leverage ORAN as part of this, right? The whole concept behind this is we're trying to develop an economic case and validate an economic case for ORAN, right? So the expectation is that you will leverage those open interfaces to be able to build these vertical solutions. Any questions on that? No? And then, of course, the final bullet that's on here, right, is, as always, right, you need to have a security by design framework in place, right? This can't be something whereby you say, oh, here's our solution, and oh yeah, by the way, of course we're going to have some security, right? Like, yeah, of course we're going to have that. This needs to be thought through, right? And it needs to be security by design, which means you need to demonstrate how that security is implemented from the beginning all the way through the life cycle of the project to the end. Very important. All right, next slide. Okay, SRFA2. Again, looking for a working prototype here. SRFA2 is all about time, right? So if there's one thing that we have heard over and over and over again from the industry verticals, or in industry just in general on this, right, is that, oh my gosh, this takes too long, right? All of this interop work in particular takes too long. So this is all about reducing that time for integration associated with that as it exists today. Okay. It looks like where we say that the prototype must address an industry vertical use case and be demonstrated under SRFA2. I don't think that's necessarily the case here. I think that's a typo, so I would ignore that. Again, SRFA2 is all about automation, right? It's all about automation and the integration of that automation. Okay, so let's go down a little bit. As you see in the third bullet point here, right? This is an important one, right? You need to have 3 OEMs that you're going to be working with on this, right? So you need to demonstrate the ability to work with at least 3 discrete OEMs on this. Right? The thought process around this, remember, we want you to make money at this, and we want you to be successful at this, and we want this to be adopted, right? And so the thought is, okay, I've been awarded, and I can work with RU vendors 1, 2, and 3. And I've proven that now, right? Now I can go out to the marketplace and say, hey, we've written a bunch of integration code on this thing, right? That has now effectively been written. And the only thing that we need to add to you, Mr. Supplier number 4 or Mrs. Supplier number 4, the only thing that we really need to add is your library, right? Which is basically your syntax, what you label things, paths, all the things that go into typical software development, right? But the point is, it's easy at that point for you to bring on vendor 4, even easier for vendor 5, 6, 7, right? And as you go, this becomes adopted and everybody wins out of that. Okay. So at a minimum, the prototype has to demonstrate automation between an open RU and to a CU and a DU. I would, again, mention that, and I think Amanda mentioned this earlier, right? That's the minimum, right? That's the minimum. For those of us that are in the business, we all know and understand that end-to-end integration goes a lot further than that, right? And an RU or any network element for that matter is going to be exchanging information with the core of the network, right? And various other functions that are held, for example, in the core of the network. And end-to-end integration testing includes all that stuff. Okay, so right now we're focused on kind of crawling before we walk and saying at a minimum, you need to have demonstrated an automation integration solution for RU to the CU-DU complex, but you're not necessarily limited to that. Okay, again, you should be starting with functional requirements. This shouldn't be anything new. And we're exiting this thing with a working prototype. So we actually want to see it work. And then the network configs, of course, must be compliant with 3GPP and then the latest trains from the ORAN Alliance specs as they are applicable. And similar to the prior SRFA, you need to have security by design built in along the way, right? Security can't just be an afterthought. You need to demonstrate how this is being built as part of the solution from the beginning.